All right, we're back. So, we've already called to order 4 hours ago. Agenda, additions, deletions. So I would take a motion to move transit to the top. Councillor Reid, all in favor? Moving transit to the top. Everybody's good? Okay. Opposed? None? I missed that. Okay, we're good. Now, are we going to continue on through the entire agenda, just talk about transit? I understand that our procedural bylaw would have us come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. if we don't get through tonight's agenda. Okay, so knowing that, just to give everybody clarity on what we're doing and how we're doing it. Does council want to move forward with the entire agenda, just debate and talk about transit tonight? Councillor Nagel?
Personally, I'd like to get through it all tonight if possible. My one item that I have is as a notice of motion, I think would be quite quick. I have a different commitment I'd have to cancel on tomorrow, so.
Stay and do it? Okay. All right.
I'll have no problem.
So moving transit to top. Minutes. Councillor Flowers, I'm going to ask you to put a motion to accept the minutes of the last meeting.
To accept the minutes of the last meeting?
Okay, awesome. Now we're into...
All in favor?
Yes, thank you. Okay. That was well done. Transit Task Force. Mr.
All right. Thanks for having us tonight. Devin LaFlèche is going to introduce the subject and go through most of the presentation. I'm going to assist him in some of the later stages of the presentation. So I'm just going to turn it over to Devin, and he's going to start.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Councillor Wilson? Thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, before we get going, as the owner of a local taxi company and also a shuttle company regionally, due to perceived public conflict of interest, I'm going to be removing myself from this discussion and the following vote, and I'll come back after.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I meant to give you your time to do that. If you would just hold on a second there, Devin.
Not a problem.
So we'll knock.
Yeah,
Okay.
please, like 3 times.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Devin LaFlèche, Transit Analyst for the Town of Cochrane, presenting with our Town CAO, Dave Devana. We'll be presenting on behalf of the Transit Task Force this evening. What we'll be presenting is the Transit Task Force, a brief background on the transit discussion here in Cochrane, key rationales for local transit, the Transit Task Force's recommended service option of on-demand transit with mobility as a service, and the recommended service standards based on this option, followed by cost estimate scenarios presented by Dave, and the Transit Task Force's recommendation, and next steps pending council approval. So the Transit Task Force is a council-appointed advisory group advising on the consideration and development of a local transit service within the town of Cochrane. It consists of 9 voting members, 2 administrative representatives, and together the Transit Task Force has worked to create the most viable and appropriate local transit service option for council consideration. On behalf of administration, I'd like to thank again all of our Transit Task Force members, as well as all the community members who gave their energy, time, and input, including those who came here tonight. Some people I met in the gallery weren't able to stay past this late time, including youth. A lot of them had math tests and school tomorrow. So just once again, administration thanks you. So a brief background, in 2011, Cochrane was approved for $9 million in Green Trip capital funding, with 1/3 being funded through the municipality through MSI and CRL grants. A number of fixed route transit options were created and presented to Town Council. However, all these previous options failed to be approved by Town Council, and Cochrane has until December 31st, 2020 to use the Green Trip capital funding. And this means work completed and everything invoiced by that deadline. For this reason, Town Council has appointed the Transit Task Force to advise on the consideration and development of a local transit service using this green trip funding. Just to give you a bit of understanding on the green trip funding, it must be used for public transit, and it must be used for the allocations within the green trip application, which now has $2 million for buses, $1 million for bus stop infrastructure, $2 million to purchase land for a transit hub, $3.5 million for design and construction of the transit hub, and $500,000 for information systems software. The town already has received $1.3 million to offset the cost of a potential site, 360 Railway Street, or the old bulk Esso station. So if the town does decide to proceed with transit and use this as the transit hub, this money we can use to offset the cost of purchasing the land. The town is also will expect to receive $1.5 million in provincial green trip funding by the end of year, leaving $3.2 million of green trip funding to collect. A very important part for council to understand is the long-term clause of the agreement. So if transit is abandoned within the first 2 years of completion, then 100% of the provincial funds must be reimbursed to the province. Between 2 to 5 years, 55% must be reimbursed, and between 5 to 10 years, 10% of the funds must be reimbursed. So it's for this reason the Transit Task Force recommends that council consider local transit as a minimum of a 5-year pilot project. Next, I'll move to some key rationales that the Transit Task Force would like to present. The first one is, some people struggle to get around in Cochrane. Key groups include youth, seniors, low-income households, and residents with limited mobility. A lack of transportation is considered the #1 social issue in Cochrane, as per the Cochrane Cares survey in 2017. Public transit is a more affordable option, and finally, it has the potential to reduce traffic congestion, which is a key concern here in Cochrane. The Transit Task Force looked at a range of potential options for a local transit service, but ultimately landed on on-demand transit with mobility as a service. The way that on-demand transit works is it bases routes on where people are and where they want to go. It can pick up and drop off riders at established stops and points, like a traditional bus route, but it also has the potential to move to door-to-door service, like a dial-a-bus system. Users can book trips through a smartphone app, computer website, and they still have the option to call in and book their trip. They can book multiple trips days in advance, or they can book last minute, and we see an acceptable wait time of 20 to 30 minutes, so we program the software based around this. Another part of this application is we get real-time updates on the location of the bus, so you can see where the bus is located on a map, as well as get push notifications on when you should go meet it at the stop. You'll also get updates on any potential delays, available space for wheelchairs or bicycles, and the historic data helps us to adjust the system to increase efficiencies. And this is really key to the efficiency of the system, is the fact that it can give a better service coverage than a fixed route for a town like Cochrane, as it doesn't send a bus to the most distant stop, let's say the top of Sunset, unless someone's actually requested the bus to be there. And where a fixed route would actually go up there, let's say for its scheduled time of 12:50, and then come back down by every single stop, the on-demand bus is going up there when someone's there and taking the most efficient route to get them to their destination. The system is also very flexible, as it can ramp down if there's low demand. So let's say if we see very low demand, we can reduce the number of buses, we can look at removing this time span in the schedule, and if there's high demand, we can actually ramp up the system. Increase the number of buses, look at establishing a fixed route or a flexible route. So if we see high demand during peak periods, we can run it as a fixed route with a schedule during this time, and then when demand drops after peak periods, we can move back to our on-demand system and actually have the buses back on a fully on-demand system with less buses on the road. Another part of the recommendation is mobility as a service. Mobility as a service uses the on-demand platform to offer a mix of transportation options. So you can still book your local transit trip, but you can also book regional trips, taxi and shuttle services, bike sharing and bike parking, carpooling, as well as ride-hailing, things like Uber. So this provides Cochrane residents with a range of options to choose from. If bus service ends, they can look at a taxi. We can also look at integrating subsidized taxis, Ubers in the future. As part of the Transit Task Force terms of reference, they conducted a robust public engagement. The engagement focused on going to meet with key groups and key events across Cochrane. And through the engagement, we were able to get over 250 survey responses and engage with over 300 residents directly in the discussion on local transit. Through the engagement process, the Transit Task Force has recommended the following service standards for council consideration as we move forward to an RFP, request for proposals. So for service coverage, all Cochrane communities would be covered, and this is efficient with the on-demand system because, again, it doesn't go to a far stop unless someone's actually requested it to be there. For bus stop coverage, we're looking at the industry standard of 400 meters, so this is a 4-minute walk or 2.5 Cochrane blocks. For acceptable average wait time, we saw 20 to 30 minutes as an acceptable average wait time, and the previous study from 2017 had 40 to 60 minute wait time, so this is quite the improvement. For acceptable average time on the bus, 20 to 30 minutes as well. In terms of buses, all 4 of these buses were acceptable as per size and appearance. So a key focus will be on cost efficiencies, so initial cost, maintenance, and the lifespan of the bus. And we'll be working with the awarded contractor to make sure our choice is successful also for them to operate. Another thing will be a preference for a modern style of bus with a low floor. This will be cost dependent, as well as we'll have accessibility using a ramp rather than a lift for efficiencies in loading. And then fuel type recommended as gasoline, and bicycles are recommended with the industry standard of front racks. In terms of fare prices, you can see what other Alberta municipalities are charging and the different offers they have. But we asked Cochrane residents on what a one-way fare should cost. And we saw a $2 to $3 range. So the Transit Task Force is recommending a $2.50 fare and also offering the option for reduced monthly passes for seniors, low-income households, students, and adults. This actually helps us build ridership and loyalty, and as well as reduce traffic congestion. In addition, we also have children under 5 riding for free. This is an industry standard, as well as fare payment options will allow all options. A lot of transit agencies are trying to phase out cash, but we won't be pushing someone away just because they choose to pay by cash. Next, we could have invested in every safety and security measure. People were very concerned about safety and security, but we wanted to look at actually what do Cochrane residents value? What do they actually see as being effective in making them feel safe and secure on the bus? What we found was security cameras, route sharing with friends and family, between stops and door-to-door drop-offs, especially during late night or icy conditions, and buses and shelters having enhanced sight lines and lighting. And then finally, improving law enforcement's ability to respond and enforce, which will be done through a transit bylaw, which we've brought back to council. In terms of cost recovery through advertising, all cost recovery options are recommended, with the exception of naming rights to the entire transit system. However, this should be reconsidered if there's an actual offer on the table. A lot of the concerns around this were who would it be, what would be the prices, what would be the name. So if there's a real offer, the Transit Task Force recommends council reconsider this. In terms of advertising management, external advertising management is recommended as it reduces risk on the part of the town, as it just sets service standards and collects a stream of revenue. For additional service standards, no pets with the exception of service dogs, beverage only, no restriction on the age that a child can travel unaccompanied, so it would be at parental discretion. Free for attendance, assisting riders with limited mobility. This actually helps with efficiencies in the system. And Wi-Fi provided for free on board. However, this would be cost dependent, and we see it through the RFP process. And the use of transit in emergency situations, so creating protocols to do this. And then next, free transit to town events. And finally, children are not required to be out of their strollers when on the bus, but it would be a common courtesy that when the bus starts to reach capacity, parents or guardians would take their child out of the stroller to allow for more room. Finally, we looked at what service span priorities mattered to Cochrane residents, 1 being the highest, 7 being the lowest. First, we have full week coverage, so making sure we have that Monday to Friday service, followed by peak period, so making sure we have extra buses on the road to handle that, what we expect to be increased demand during these peak periods, followed by late nights, Saturday service, Sunday service, early mornings, and service on holidays. This is very important as the on-demand system can be used to test different times, and knowing these priorities, we know where to start by testing. I'll now pass it over to Dave with cost estimates and the Transit Task Force recommendation.
Thanks, Devin. Oops. All right, so the Transit Task Force came up with 2 options that they would like us to go out to RFP and get costed. The first one is the enhanced service on-demand scenario. And this one has early morning service starting at 5 a.m., peak service from 6 till 9, non-peak from 9 till 3, peak from 3 to 8, and then, or 6, and then 6 to 8 o'clock, non-peak again. It also includes Saturday, which is more extensive than the next one that we're going to show you, and it includes Sunday service. And this was the Transit Task Force attempt to meet the previous, this one here, kind of outweigh these priorities and come up with what we call the enhanced service. In this one, what we tried to do is we looked at a study for other municipalities and saw what the cost recovery was. And on the low side, it was 17%. On the high side, it was 44%. And the Transit Task Force says that we should go for an average of 33% cost recovery. And we're anticipating that this will result under this scenario in 132,000 riders, an annual net cost of $669,000, and the average cost to the average home of $4.63. This is based on the cost to operate the bus per hour of service. So what we have here is we have a total number of hours of 246 per week. We times that by 52. We times that by $75. We get the gross cost of providing the service, and then we take off the 33% net cost recovery, end up with a net $669,000 for this particular scenario. The recommended on-demand scenario, which we are also going to go out and get costed, and this is the one that the Transit Task Force feels is the most desirable system to do at the start, subject to cost. The difference with this one is that we're not starting as early in the morning. We go the same amount of time to 8 p.m. Our Saturday coverage is, what's this out here? Yeah, is just 9 to 3, and then there's no Sunday service. The reason that we've recommended this is the on-demand scenario is that the 33% cost recovery, there's 109 estimated ridership, 554 net operating costs, and the average cost to the average home of $3.84 a month. And this is in line with the net $600,000 that we have been incorporating into the 2019 to 2021 budget. The recommendation that is being brought forward is really a two-part recommendation. The first part is that council approve the Transit Task Force local transit recommended service standards, which were outlined by Devin. And the second part is direct administration to proceed to the request for proposal process based on those approved service standards for an on-demand transit system seeking costs for both the enhanced base service scenario and the recommended base service scenario. And we just wanted to go through what we feel will be the next steps if, in the event that you were to approve the service standards tonight and direct administration to do the request for proposal. We feel the request for proposal process would happen in September to November. We would have the proposals in place. Then we would come back to council for a decision on awarding the contract on November the 26th, 2018. And this date has been strategically picked so that we're in a position to include the actual costs of the proposal should you accept the contract, so that we can include it in the budget that is set to be approved on December the 10th, 2018. We have committed to go to the province and ensure that they can reconfirm that the green trip funding that remains outstanding is still available, so before you make your decision. And then it is important that if we get a decision on December the 10th, it's our understanding that it will take up to 6 months for us to get the buses, and therefore, we would be in a position by August 2019 to do what we call the soft launch of the service. And then we would run a small pilot to see how the software is working and how our system is working, and then transition to a full launch. That's our presentation for tonight.
Awesome, thank you. And again, Devin, you said this, but thanks to the public at large that put their time and efforts into serving on the Transit Task Force. So thanks again to all the folks that worked over the past 6 months on this. So I see everybody's got their light on. I was going to go to a Transit Task Force person, whether it be Councillor Federico or Councillor McFadden, to put the first motion on the floor.
Certainly. Yes, I'm quite happy to move option 1, that council approve the Transit Task Force's local transit recommended service standards, and furthermore direct administration to proceed to the request for proposal process based on those approved service standards for the on-demand transit system, and seek costing for the enhanced base service scenario and recommended base service scenario. Just real quickly, this is the most extensive public engagement process I've been through in my 10 years as a town councillor. I certainly feel that this is the best opportunity with the lowest risk to provide transit to our residents, and I feel it's past time. If the time's not now, I don't think we'll be able to get another opportunity to do it with this much low cost to our residents for another decade or so. So that being said, though, before we can make any of those decisions, we do need to have those final numbers, and that's why I support getting the RFP so that council can debate actual knowledge.
Thank you. Councillor Flowers?
Okay, thank you for your report, and thanks to the audience for staying so late to hear this report happening. There's been lots of questions about the numbers, so I'm really glad you put the motions on the table so we can get the real numbers and know exactly what we're working with to get reducing traffic and have a more inclusive community. So thank you again.
Councillor Nagel?
I would just like to be crystal clear that what we're voting on tonight is not the final go-ahead for transit, but just to get more information, correct?
The process is to go out, get the numbers, bring the numbers back to council, and council make the final decision in December if you follow the calendar.
Okay, great. I will support tonight's motion. I still am skeptical, have some other questions and stuff, but I'll save all that for once we have some firm details to actually discuss. Thanks.
Councillor Federico?
I too will support going to the RFP, but I do have some concerns that I'm not necessarily happy with the word that it's going to imply that we're going to that next step in offering the contract to a provider quite yet. I am for a transportation system. Again, I'm just trying to go through my own thought process on whether or not this is the best way to approach it. I do have a question, Devin. Did you do any further engagement? I think after the last council meeting, I kind of put it out there that, you know what, once the report was kind of released, that it would be great to kind of see some more public engagement done, or you outreach to the public, and I'm just not sure if that ever did happen.
I did have people contact me. We didn't open it up again because for the task force, we were looking at service standards. Our terms of reference were very clear on trying to understand for local transit, what are the service standards, we set those, and now we could be directed to go elsewhere. But at this point, we followed the terms of reference, the engagement set by the transit task force, and that's where we left off. I did meet with quite a few members of the public who reached out through hearing about it in the media, from watching the live stream, so.
Okay. I mean, I did my, and as unconventional as maybe it seemed, I did my own kind of polling and asking my own questions, and I'm glad that I did that because I had almost 300 responses. And you know what, it cleared up some things that I was confused about the regional versus local. So I got some answers there, and you know, I guess some of my questions still are around usership. A lot of people weren't necessarily going to use it more than once or twice a week. That was kind of general consensus. But people did support the fact that they would be okay paying some increase on their taxes. But some of the comments that I did hear that I thought that I would throw back out to you, and you can take them for whatever you want, is that some people would like to see a user pay system so that, what their tax bill isn't necessarily implicated, that the people who are going to use the service are actually going to pay a little bit more for it. That was one comment, and a lot of parents were quite hopeful that the hours would be extended for youth, as well as Sundays. They seem to both be two areas that perhaps we may want to reconsider. But other than that, I absolutely will move it forward to the next process, because I don't think we can really make a decision without final costs in mind, and so I would support that. But in no means do I want to say that I'm gung-ho when we're going to the next step. I really want to take a look at those numbers.
Thank you. Councillor Reid?
Well, I'd like to begin as well, thanking the task force for all their hard work and efforts. I mean that sincerely. I'd like to begin by asking an initial question and then making some comments. So Devin, does the annual operating costs include the replacement of the buses and the communications plan that you spoke of on CBC?
So for the replacement of the buses, there's a number of ways we could do this. With hard costs, I'd rather present them, because let's say if we have a lower cost than expected, and we have surplus revenue from that 33% cost recovery rate, if we're looking at 600,000, then we can actually use that surplus and the rise in population to offset that cost, create a capital reserve. There's also other ways. We have to consider the fact that council might actually not want to purchase more buses in the future. They may actually want to contract out the buses. So maybe we'll see the hard costs. We'll get a better understanding of that once we actually have some hard numbers there. There's a number of ways we can create a capital reserve, but without the hard numbers, I wouldn't make a recommendation on that yet.
Okay, so to be clear then, the costs are not included, which is unfortunate, because it then really calls into question all the other financial numbers that are to follow. So my comment is, I've got a couple of comments. So this whole approach to dealing with the issue of transit, I think, is a classic example of an idea and a wealth of communications and propaganda that's gotten way ahead of the actual detailed financial information to be able to make an informed and, I would say, unemotional, objective decision. And while I appreciate it wasn't the mandate of the task force to look at the cost of transit in isolation, and that's even if the numbers were accurate and understandable. Given everything else that the town has responsibility for, just to consider transit in isolation of everything else, given what we're accountable for, I think not only has clouded, but really has complicated the whole decision and approval process. I would say it's made it unfair, and I think there's an uninformed public pressure on that decision as a result of it. I kind of characterize it as getting people all excited about something without really providing them with the financial information to make an informed and objective decision. So I'm concerned about the approach, and interesting enough, it seems unusually similar to the approach that was used for the pool. Likewise, the approach used for your report, which I and many others have found very confusing and difficult to work through in terms of the depth of the critical financial information that we need to make a decision. There is a cumulative tax implication for transit for every citizen of Cochrane, and they have the right to know that clearly, along with the members of council. And so, while I support the first part of this recommendation, the implication I'm not prepared to support, and therefore won't support the motion overall if that's not removed. Given that that we don't have the information, I think, to make an informed decision, I can't believe I can support that second part of it. For those who've jumped on the Cochrane Transit bus because they believe the $6 million is guaranteed, well, it's not. With all the potential change in government, the resulting financial implications to this province as a result of the Trans Mountain Pipeline decision, there is a potential and an identified risk to the town if we proceed with this decision on transit. Spending millions of dollars on a transit system just because a grant's available is not a good reason alone, particularly to endorse an unproven transit system. Likewise, anyone who thinks that this is only a pilot is totally naive. Just accepting the fact, why don't we just accept the fact that if approved, transit is here to stay, and we'll have the financial implications of that on the backs of the taxpayers of Cochrane for decades to come. So it's one thing to be leading edge, it's quite another to be bleeding edge. But with all that being said, I want to be explicitly clear. I am a supporter of transit for all the reasons that have been identified. Supporting transit is simply being socially responsible. However, in a world of unlimited wants and limited resources, we need both to be very careful and selective about how much of a tax burden we place on the back of our citizens while wishing to be socially responsible. Being socially responsible doesn't always coincide with being financially responsible. Unlike the seemingly socially responsible and totally financially irresponsible for provincial and federal governments, the town of Cochrane cannot legally and simply accumulate a massive debt. The town of Cochrane doesn't have the luxury of running massive debts like those two other levels of government. All the financial risks, the overruns, and any poor monetary assumptions based on this decision the town will face will squarely fall into the backs of the taxpayers of Cochrane. The one-line reference in the report that the financial implications of transit regarding the rest of the town's finances simply don't add up when I add the numbers up, and I've had others look at those numbers. It literally does not make sense. Financially, I feel like we're standing in front of a runaway bus. And I will predict, if approved, transit will easily eclipse the financial burdens placed on the taxpayers of Cochrane that the pool has. My prediction is that transit will saddle the taxpayers of Cochrane with millions of dollars over the next decade, along with the other expenses like $1.2 million deficit in the pool this year, a $54 million bridge, the cost of an RCMP building, the potential overrun costs on the bridge and the RCMP building, the total cost of salary increases for the town staff, unsettled union contracts in our 10-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. I'm also predicting that very few people will be happy with the service, and the operating costs will explode exponentially. Again, while I appreciate that this is not the mandate of the task force to report on the overall potential financial burden this could place on the taxpayers' backs of the town, that's my main concern. While I am prepared to support the recommendation, as I suggested earlier, on securing more RFP information, I cannot support the implications note, which suggests something quite different than what's being proposed or spoken of earlier. Until I can feel confident that the town can actually afford a transit system on top of all of its other financial obligations, I can only support the request for an RFP. I'd like to work with the administration to secure sufficient and realistic detailed financial data that includes the cost of replacing the buses in the communications plan that you spoke of. And so we can make an unemotional, fact-based, informed decision in December. Likewise, the University of Calgary has offered to provide us with 2 graduate students to prepare an independent report for the on the town's financial situation and status as it relates to transit, should be considered with the RFP in December, if council be willing to have a second pair of eyes look at our cumulative cost. So to be perfectly clear, I am a transit supporter, but only if the town can afford it, and only if we can move to the next phase in terms of the RFP. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you're in favor of moving forward or not moving forward.
So I'm in favor of the first part of this recommendation, but not the implication phase.
Okay, question to you, Mr. Devanna. Similar to Councillor Nagel's question about what we're voting on tonight, we're not fixing anything in the future that we are, council is bound to move ahead with transit yet. This is just getting an RFP, getting costs on the 2 different levels of service, and coming back to council so that we can make an informed decision during the budget.
The implication simply says on December the 10th, or November the 26th is the way we had up there, that you will consider awarding the contract or not. It's up to you.
Okay.
But we will bring you the bidders and you make the decision.
Okay.
Administration will not be moving forward with transit until we get your final decision.
Thank you. Councillor Nagel, or Flowers, sorry.
Thank you. So I feel like we just got scolded as children because we're not looking at all the financials at one time. But this needs to be looked at independently. It's been a big need for a long time, and yes, it's emotional. People are leaving our community because they don't have it. So all the smoke and all the mirrors doesn't take it away. We need transit. We've come up with something that we can follow through on. Let's get at it and stop spinning our wheels. It must be NIMBY is the only thing that I can come up with, not in my backyard for some reason that's stalling this process.
Councillor Reid?
Yeah, I don't want to respond to that because it's not appropriate. The question I do have, though, is have any preliminary discussions occurred with, with Southland regarding any aspect of the RFP?
Have any, sorry,
RFP?
have any,
So the question is, have any preliminary discussions occurred with Southland in regards to the RFP we're talking about?
Well, Southland's aware of the work that we've been doing on the service standards. Southland also provided us with a cost estimate of what it might cost to do a service per hour. Southland also did a simulation on what they thought the transit system worked. But we don't have the RFP, so we haven't consulted them directly on the RFP, what the contents of it will be or not be at this point.
Yeah, supplemental. So does that give them an unfair advantage? Excuse me.
I don't believe so, no. They've, provided their time. They are the transit provider in some of our adjacent communities, and they have helped guide us. But all parties will have the same amount of time to review it.
So it doesn't violate any of the basic tenets of an RFP process, is what you're saying?
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, thank you.
okay, I've got a couple questions. Just got to find them here. Take so many notes tonight. Timing and next steps you talked about, so I think everybody's pretty much in agreement that moving forward tonight on the RFP. Otherwise, we risk losing the grant altogether, correct?
Well, I think it's, I wouldn't say altogether. What I would say is if you want to have real values for the budget that will be considered for 2019 to 2021, then you need to give us an approval tonight, so that we have an adequate amount of time to prepare the request for proposal, put it out there with a reasonable amount of time for people to submit, and for us to evaluate those proposals and then bring them back to you on November the 26th. That's been our target as administration, so that you're able to include or not include transit in the 2019 budget moving forward.
Okay.
And if and this idea is that we would have an opportunity to test the system, buy all the equipment, and get it all ready to go by August 2019. If that's council's wish, then we need to get on with it tonight.
Okay. Councillor Reid questioned the funding and that it may not be secure in the future with future governments moving in or out potentially in the province. How much of our 6 million do we have already?
So we have 1.2 so far. We're almost 1.3. The province is also committed that they're advancing 1.5 in 2018. And if we get this thing moving, it would be our hope that all of our expenditures would be made by August 2019, which in my view would deem that the additional 3.2 million pretty secure. And we do have a contract that says that they will advance its monies. So, our report says that we think the risk is minimal, that we won't be able to get this money
And then
if we work on this schedule. for sure.
So, and part of your schedule says reconfirm remaining green trip funding. That would be prior to council decision and
Yeah.
the budget as well?
Well, if you guys give us, allow us to advance, we're going to update them.
Yeah.
That we're going to be moving to an RFP process. And then if you decide to award, we're also going to be updating them again and confirming that that money is in place. But we believe it is firmly in place.
Okay, thank you. And the ridership numbers, where did those come from? I know the answer, I'm just, I'm asking.
So the ridership is based on a cost recovery rate. Rather than use a scenario like we had before with the 234,000 for the exact same scenario for this, we use cost recovery rates and then base that off of fare. We can do some estimates. I've done a couple that have much higher than actually this 109. But we're good with this cost recovery rate. We can maybe look at some simulations and use the RFP process to have potential bidders to demonstrate what their system will actually be able to take for ridership and things like that. So we'll weed it out in the RFP process, and I can do more calculations. So.
And the previous presentation to council, which was the fixed route,
Yep.
the number, and you just referenced it, the numbers were a lot higher.
234,000 for the exact same times and coverage for this system. So 234,000 and $1.5 million after that 234,000 riders are taken off as revenue.
We simply did that so that you could compare apples and apples.
Yeah.
And we wanted, because the fixed route system that was put forward by the Calgary Transit report used 234,000 and said that the net costs were 1.5 million. We thought it would be useful for council to know what an on-demand system could cost using the same ridership. We are focusing on the 33 because we feel that that is a more likely ridership. But we just wanted you to be able, because that 1.5 number was out there. And we want you to know if that same ridership was produced, what this system would be. But we're not aiming for 234, not in the early years of this
Yeah.
proposal.
No, I understand that. I'm focusing more on it was Calgary Transit that provided the 234,000, right?
So now we're using a cost recovery rate of 33%, and it takes a $2.50 one-way fare and applies it to this cost recovery rate to give us 109,000 riders. This doesn't include any cost recovery through partnerships or advertising.
No.
So that actually could impact the ridership to a lower amount.
Yeah.
But we didn't know if, what the service standard was yet for advertising, so council first has to approve it.
I understand that. I'm making the point that the Transit Task Force took a more conservative approach than City Transit in Calgary with proven transit riders and numbers, and that's the 234,000 riders that they projected that Cochrane would have, and that was, I think, after a few years, correct?
That's correct.
So we're using half of that as the projected baseline in year 5.
Yeah.
Correct?
Well, we were saying average over the 5-year pilot.
Yes. Okay. Awesome, thanks. Well, I started the transit debate being on the bus of going nowhere, and I was actually quite opposed to transit when during the election and the months leading up to us coming out with our task force. Which is one of the reasons I wanted to be on the committee in the first place, was to bring the voice of, really, are we really here as a community? Do we really need a transit system now? And the debate has gone on for way too long, and Councillor Flowers, you alluded to that in your comments. But I'm actually happy that it has taken this long, because not for the people that actually are going to use a transit system and having to find other alternatives in the meantime while we make up our mind. It's more about that I think the system that we've landed on as a task force is something that fits Cochrane. The one that I saw prior to the election and post that was given to us, and I just alluded to it, from the City of Calgary, fixed route, it was trying to shoehorn in a large city transit system into Cochrane. In my view, that was too expensive and did not fit. But as of all of the work that we've done on the task force, I have completely changed my mind, given the fact that the costs are relatively, well, way lower than what they are, and I'm in complete support of going to RFP to find out exactly what they're going to be. And I think the 5-year pilot makes sense. A pilot, and I think if you want, you can bring up that slide again of the 5-year and what our if you have it, the 5-year costs that the task force dug into, looking at, and these were projected from the, you don't have to, if you don't have
It's in the report.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I talked about it earlier, but the 5-year pilot where the ultimate cost to Cochrane at the end of that, backing out with all the assets in place, yes, we would have to do operating costs in the meantime for the 5 years, but it's roughly a net zero risk for 5 years to do the transit pilot. So for me, it's all about the grant. It's about moving forward with monies that we have pretty much secured. I'm hearing from administration that they're very confident we'll get the entire grant to be able to move forward. So I would ask if you're in favor of transit and you believe that we need a transit system, then when are we going to be able to afford to do this ever again? Within the next 10 years, our community's growing. The need is there now. If the service is to be considered now, then the future, if you're going to consider it in the future, then we need to do it now, is what I'm trying to say. And the implications of that, and I think, and I'm not just looking at transit in its, in a bubble by itself. I think that we have to ask ourselves if we're willing to give back a grant to the province of Alberta. I think, and this is outside the transit debate, but I think it has real implications. If we are going to be the community that turns around and says to the province, and I don't care what government's in place, no thank you, we do not want your money. Good luck ever applying for another grant again from the province. I just think they're going to see the word Cochrane and go, yeah, those guys take 9 years to make up their mind, and then they'll give it back to you anyways. On the other side of that, I think that we have been given money in this hand, and we're asking for money in this hand to build a new 1A and 22 intersection. So the province has said, here's some money, do something about your traffic that you have control over, and put in a transit system. That will alleviate traffic. We don't know how much, but it will alleviate traffic. This council was given a strong mandate in the election to address traffic concerns. I believe this is a way that we can do so. So if we're going to ask for money and infrastructure from the province over here, but turn down a way to solve our own traffic concerns on this hand over here, I would really think that the province will be shaking their head at us and going, you guys need to figure out what you're doing down there, because you're moving in two opposite directions. You want us to provide money and infrastructure, but you're not willing to do anything about it yourself. So the benefits of transit are clear. I've got a list. Economic benefits to the community, health benefits to the community. Transit reduces road congestion, which I just talked about. Transit lessens gas use and reduces pollution. Millennials prefer transit lifestyle over the urban sprawl and enjoy walkable communities, which transit provides. There's a freedom of mobility and that is amplified by public transit. Household expenses are potentially reduced by using transit. Social connections increase when transit is available. Commuters are more productive, and I love this one, on transit versus driving, because they can sleep while riding the bus, or they can read while riding the bus, write, relax, or even work while riding the bus. And public transit is a safe and equitable transportation mode. So if I ask, if not now, then when? And not moving forward tonight takes the $6 million off the table. And so I think it's pretty easy from my point of view that the time to move transit forward is today, and that we should stop, as Councillor Flowers said, getting stuck in the mud about this and move forward. Councillor Padeko?
Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts. It's always good to share and, be able to get those things out. And you know what? I think that we all need to be respectful of where everybody's at within this process, because I totally get where Councillor Flowers is coming from, and I've certainly heard your thoughts, Mayor Janung, but I think that we all need to be mindful of each other and maybe where each other's at in our own opinions. When it comes to the RFP process, will that information be made public so that the community at large, I know that we have budget deliberations going on, will the public be able to see those amounts before we go into deliberations?
Yep. You'll get a report November 26th. It'll tell you what the award amounts are, and then you guys make a decision. It'll all be public.
But if we're making the decision, will the public have a chance to see that, I guess, ahead of November 26th so that they'll also be able to take a look?
No, I'd say no. We will get the packages. The normal process is that we would get the packages. We would review the packages, make sure they're compliant. We will write a report, as we would for anything that we do. And the report would have all the relevant information in there, and that would be the first time that council will be seeing it, and be the first time the public sees it.
Okay. I mean, I think that, as much as that there are people that want transit and are obviously very passionate to proceed with the service, there are people out there who also are concerned about their taxes and what that implication is going to mean long-term to their family as well. And so I just want to make sure that we are doing our due diligence as a council to be able to look at all sides. As much as, I don't think any of us have said here tonight that we aren't supporting transit or supporting the idea, but some of us are just maybe a little bit more cautious. And you know what? It's going to go forward to the RFP, and we're all excited to see what exactly comes out of it. But I would ask that we're maybe mindful of where everybody's at.
Councillor Reid?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a comment to, in terms of a respectful process, no one said anything about giving back the grant. No one was talking about diminishing the value of all the social benefits associated with transit. So I'm not sure what that tyrant is about, but I appreciate that. I don't know about traffic, and I don't know that anybody is stuck in the mud. I am troubled still about the implication on this motion, because it implies something more than I think the first paragraph suggests. And if it would be considered a friendly amendment, I would ask that we remove just the implication and go with the recommendation. I'd also like to throw back out the offer of the University of Calgary to offer administration some help, a second pair of eyes, having 2 graduate students assist in crunching the financial numbers on transit. I think, again, I am a supporter of transit from a social perspective. I worry about the overall costs. And, I don't think anybody's talking about giving away the grant. I think what we're talking about, and I had this conversation with Dave, I lived through the era when Ralph Klein came in as premier and said 3 months into his term, having worked at a university that had already had its, if you will, contracted funds for the year, face a 10% clawback in the middle of the year. So Ralph came in and said, this is bigger than our household budget. As a university, we're asking you to give back 10% of your budget right in the middle of the year, when nobody said it could be done, and it was done. And so, am I concerned about this, that this $6 million is for real? I am. And I think that, you have the appropriate steps in place to make sure that it is real before we award that contract, if we should decide to go ahead. And again, my main point is, what is the overall cost to the taxpayer of Cochrane? Not just in isolation of transit, but overall. If it only is $5 a month, then most people will be able, I think, to tolerate that. But if it's greater than that, and our residential tax rate goes beyond 3%, then there is a problem, I think. People are going to have a problem with that.
Okay, I just want to be clear. The recommendation does not include the implication. That's simply just a courtesy, of where we're going as the next step. Should we move to this? So council will consider whether they award it or not, but it's not the recommendation that will end up in the minutes. It will stop at scenario. Just so to be clear.
Okay, thank you for that. The, giving up the grant, I wasn't suggesting that we are giving back the grant. I'm saying if we don't act, then we will run out of time and we'll end up losing the grant. One point that I would like to ask you about, Councillor Reid, was you're asking our administration to go to the university and find students to help us with the budget?
So I've already actually approached the Dean of Business at the University of Calgary and asked if 2 students might be available, graduate students might be available to assist us if the town were willing to endorse that. And the offer is that they would provide 2 graduate students, MBA executive students, who'd be willing to assist us, second pair of eyes, if you will, in terms of the financial implications of transit in relation to our overall budget. Again, it's just an offer that they are prepared to extend to us as a courtesy.
So I would ask you, what makes you think that 2 unknown U of C students are more capable than our own administration? Which is, and then I would ask the question, did you take the time that I suggested that you take to meet with our transit analyst, given all the questions that you've had about transit?
So to your first question, it's not a question of capacity or ability. It's a question of being able to offer assistance in terms of a second pair of eyes. That's all. Okay?
Okay.
So again, in the spirit of wishing to be respectful and professional in this manner, I think that question is suggesting more than the offer implied.
Okay.
Okay?
And the second question,
Second question was,
did you take the time to
I
meet?
haven't had the time to meet with Devin,
Okay.
but I've certainly given him enough questions.
Yeah, you have. All right.
Just in that vein, then, if I could. So in terms of the RFP process, I had a number of suggestions that we would incorporate in terms of the RFP process. Would they be taken into consideration?
I can say they can be taken into consideration. I'm not saying that they'll all be done the way you want them necessarily, but they'll be taken into consideration.
Okay, I think we've
That's good for that one, yeah.
talked about it to death now. So the motion on the floor, council approves the transit task force recommended service standards, and the council directs administration to, sorry, yeah. Oh, you have your light on, I'm sorry.
I did.
So would you like to close debate?
Yes, as the person who put the motion on the floor, did you get that privilege?
I was just gonna speak about the motion and then go to you for closing, so thank you.
So, actually, I did have one question for clarification. The numbers are going to come back to council in time for the budget deliberation process?
Yep, that's the plan.
That's the plan? So, yeah, so I just want to speak to this. There was the comment about the grant. So if we decide as a community that we don't want to move ahead with the $6 or $9 million in grant funding, we will lose and have to pay back the existing $2.3 million grant, which I think, sorry,
We got 1.3 for the land, and they were going to advance us another 1.5, so we would return that money.
Right, so the 1.3 that we've already spent in purchasing land, we would have to pay back, which equates to 2.5 years of transit service. But overall, I did want to speak to what a great process I've actually found is, in that we established the transit task force. We gave them a clear mandate to both evaluate transit, yes, no, and to make a recommendation of what is the best fit. What's the Cochrane solution? And they came up with a made-in-Cochrane transit solution that's unique to the country. That's a feasible and affordable cost. So the task force reported back. They gave us an understanding after heavily engagement with the community, what the community expects transit in Cochrane to be. The next step is coming back to council for the report, and then we're going to move ahead and get the actual costs. From there, it's going to be part of the budget process, and that's where we as council step up and analyze those costs within the bigger context of the budget to see what the actual weight of providing all of our residents' needs are. And so I think it's a very clear process. I think it's going to allow for a lot of engagement, and I think at the end of the day, council's going to be able to decide whether it's time to move ahead with transit in Cochrane. I really do believe if we don't take this opportunity now, though, there will be no transit in Cochrane for at least a decade, because this opportunity to get $9 million in capital funding may never come again.
All right. Well said. So, everyone's clear on the motion? Okay. All those in favor? None opposed. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you. We should get... She's got it. Okay, where are we now? Welcome back. Oh, wow, that could have been, okay. Okay. Bylaws, cannabis permit. We're still in a meeting, FYI, yeah. Okay, Riley,
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm here to present Bylaw 30, 2008 to Council, which is related to the cannabis retail stores development permit requirements. That is, actually, I'll get. The bylaw actually deals with a clarification in our land use bylaw that will amend the land use bylaw to close the existing exemptions that would allow cannabis retail stores to operate without a development permit in some cases. The second portion of this presentation will deal with the actual application process for cannabis retail stores. So currently in our bylaw, section 1.2.0, it specifies the list of developments where a development permit is not included or not required. This includes a change of use in commercial buildings under certain conditions, and compliance with this bylaw is still required. So the amendment to the land use bylaw that we're proposing here is to add a new clause to require that cannabis retail stores apply for a development permit regardless of this section of the land use bylaw. And we're just going to close that loophole. With regards to the cannabis retail applications, administration will start accepting applications for cannabis retail stores on October 1st. Applications will be made in person. No permits will be issued until, and this is very clear, until after the cannabis legislation is legalized on October 17th. The applications will be reviewed on a first come, first served basis. And if an application is incomplete, the applicant will be required to resubmit the missing information and will be moved to the back of the queue. So ultimately, we will be accepting the applications on October 1st. We will be reviewing them to determine if they are complete or not. If they are complete, they will be put in the queue in the order in which they were received. This is just the flow chart which was included in your council report. And the cannabis retail requirements are the application form, application fee, certificate of title, letter of authorization, and all the required drawings and site plans. The recommended action tonight is that council gives first reading to bylaw 30, 2018 and that council establishes a public hearing date for September 24th, 2018 at 6 p.m. That concludes my report and presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Councillor McFadden.
Thank you very much. I did have, I'm more than glad to move first reading to bylaw 30, 2018. I did have a question though for clarification. One of the things we're trying to do with the bylaws and processes surrounding the cannabis retail outlets is that they're a certain distance away from schools or anywhere where the kids might be.
Right.
But what is to stop after you have a retail environment set up that a daycare could open closer to that jurisdiction? Do we need to look at the land use bylaw from the other perspective and ensure that day homes, anything with kids, are also set back from existing cannabis retail outlets?
Through Mayor Janung to Councillor McFadden, that's a very good question. And the way that the land use bylaw is currently set up is not a reciprocal setback. The setback would only apply to the cannabis retail stores to be set back from these types of uses. So if a use is proposed within this distance to an existing cannabis retail store, those setback distance would not apply to those particular land uses. So that's the way that the bylaw is currently in place. Yeah. It would only apply for the cannabis retail stores.
Okay. So in this process, would this be where we could look at doing those reciprocal distances?
Yeah, through Mayor Janung, yes, this is something that we can consider, maybe not through this particular bylaw, but certainly something to move forward if that is something that we want to move forward with. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarity.
More questions? Oh, Councillor Padeco?
Can I ask one quick question, Riley?
Sure, yeah.
Would there be signage provided during the process so that, neighboring businesses or people might know what's happening? I know that hasn't been necessarily redone through the land use bylaw yet, but is that something that we could look at for this?
Through Mayor Janung, yes. So we will be bringing forward notification, a development permit notification bylaw. There is one existing. We are looking at making some amendments to it, but that will be brought forward here relatively soon. Now, that would apply to all development permit applications, not just specifically for the cannabis retail stores. Now, if that is something that we would like to consider, it would be at this point in time, due to the timing and the quickly approaching October 17th and October 1st dates, something that we would likely not get to council for their consideration for an amendment. Now, what we can do is during the application process is we can talk to the applicants and talk to the landowners and certainly ask them to provide signage once an application is made.
Could we offer an amendment this evening to push that through or to push that forward if council is in favor?
I think because this is first reading.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thanks.
Okay.
Any other questions? Nope. All in favor of first reading? Who wants to do public hearing? Councillor Wilson, come on. You were gone for an hour. You can come back in and get back into action here.
I will so move public hearing for the date that I just had on my
Monday,
screen.
September
Monday,
24th.
September 23rd, 4th.
6 p.m. All in favor? Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Now, where are we now? Corridor planning.
Just one quick moment, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to load my presentation. I didn't have an opportunity to do that earlier this evening. It will only take me a moment. My apologies. I'm here tonight to present corridor design or corridor planning and design project for your consideration. Just in terms of a little bit of background, on May 14th, Councillor McFadden made a notice of motion which read the town of Cochrane will be making a significant investment in transportation infrastructure over the next 10 years, as outlined in Council's recently adopted 10-year financial plan. Some of this critical infrastructure projects include the Bow River Bridge, the extension of James Walker Trail, upgrades to Center Ave, and working with Alberta Transportation regarding the future of Highway 1A. Each of these projects will provide a significant benefit to the town, the transportation network, and the citizens of Cochrane. As important these projects may be, it's also critical to understand the importance of the overall design of these transportation corridors that are being created. Therefore, it's imperative to have corridor designs in place prior to the development proceeding. So there was that notice of motion. Subsequently, on June 25th, Council passed a motion to direct staff to prepare a report to outline the cost of the Griffin Corridor study by September 10th. That's being this evening, and include this for consideration in the 2019 budget. Of course, at the time of this original notice of motion, it was specific to the Griffin Corridor, as we were making so much of an investment in that corridor. Of course, one of the things staff did as we get your notices of motion is we look at not only the notice itself, but understood that there's several other key corridors facing in the town that are facing significant development pressure. These include Railway Street, 5th Avenue, River Avenue, and Highway 1A. And right now, this presents a unique opportunity to help the future shape of these areas by investing in the public realm. If you think of some of the corridors within our community, obviously Center Ave comes to mind immediately, and the investment that's been done in there, and one of our signature streets. So is there an opportunity with so many competing interests? Obviously moving traffic is an important consideration, but particularly with the Griffin Corridor, as that area is developed, there is some form of consideration of what that corridor is going to look like with road classifications, how buildings are going to front onto that, rather than an ad hoc approach. So we want to have, in terms of our evaluation, the functionality, character, and quality of these public spaces will help ensure the vibrancy and part of our community identity. These are going to be major road networks as we move forward. You think of the 10-year financial plan, it's about $290 million in investment. So why would we leave their future development to chance or ad hoc development? We want to be proactive in our planning of these areas. I picked this out of the Integrated Downtown Action Plan. Excuse me. I guess I'm trying to go a little bit fast as it's been a long evening for everybody. However, well-designed and maintained public realm attracts shoppers and reinforces the quality of its goods and services. But I don't want you to think this is only about shopping, because this is really about the downtown. We're talking about a few different road networks, but I think the same principles apply. Investments in the public realm will serve to enhance the quality of life of downtown residents, increase market demand for downtown multifamily residential development, and attract tourists to enjoy the broader range of downtown amenities. This is also from the Downtown Action Plan. So again, there's a lot of rationale to pursue this. So what is the proposal, as you're asking, okay? So rather than just focusing on the one corridor, what staff is recommending is, well, why don't we create corridor planning and design principles that we can apply to a number of different corridors within our community. So it'll address road classifications, where utilities locations are going to be, what the desired streetscape would look like, access management strategies, land use provisions, including built form. Do we want all the parking lots to be right on these major corridors, or should the parking be in a different area? Where's the orientation of the building? What are the character? I think obviously we've got the Western Design Guidelines, but really all these things can help define us as a community, and they're all for the benefit of the greater community. So this is just an example of those corridors. Within the downtown, of course, you've got Griffin, you've got River, Railway, and 5th. In the report, we also did include a reference to Highway 1A, which some of the principles we could utilize when we're continuing our discussions with Alberta Transportation, and then as they move that project forward. So in terms of our recommendation, It is option one, that council direct or accept this report as information and direct administration to include $100,000 for corridor planning and design project as part of the 2019 draft budget. There are two other options. Certainly, if council so wished, we could go back for option two, which is just focusing on the Griffin corridor, and for a budget of $30,000, or for council to provide us with further direction. But our recommendation would be option one, to have this fulsome evaluation. Be happy to answer any questions. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you. Councillor McFadden, this was your notice of motion?
Yes, it was. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm pleased to move the recommended action. I certainly appreciate the broader approach to this, and that was kind of where I would have liked to have gone in the first place, so I'm glad that staff is supporting the broader approach. I think we really need to be looking, there's an expectation that we as a council are planning for the future and understanding what the growth impacts are, and making sure that in our downtown core that our residents can move and connect with these areas as easily as possible. So I'm glad to see it there, and to quote somebody, or to roughly quote somebody, this should be absolutely a no-brainer.
Go to Councillor Reid next. He was wanting to speak first, but then graciously got out of the way for the notice of motion.
Is that okay? So I just wanted to begin by thanking Councillor McFadden for bringing this up originally. I think it's a great idea, and I would applaud the fact that we've actually broadened it. I thought the original scope was too narrow, and so I think this is the right move, and so yeah, I really applaud the move to be able to broaden it to include all of this and look at it in a holistic kind of way. So thank you.
Councillor Nagel?
Two simple questions for clarification. One, this is basically a study to figure out how to improve traffic downtown, correct?
Through the chair to Councillor Nagel, that would be one aspect of it, but it's also what those streetscapes appear as. There's a number of competing interests. I know there's been comments about bike lanes, but multimodal. How are we going to design this so the future of our transportation corridors are not only efficient, but they're also something that we can be proud of?
Okay. And just for further clarification, even though I know the answer, we're not actually spending $100,000 tonight. This is just to stick it in the budget. So if we had a crazy change of heart, we could shut it down in November.
Absolutely correct.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, all in favor? Oh, sorry, Councillor Wilson, last minute into the buzzer.
I know. Traffic flows, this is an area that I've talked about, that Mr. Deans has met with me about a few different ideas on traffic flows. Is there any way to also add that as part of the study that we're doing? I believe that was already added in as part of the corridor study.
Through the chair to Councillor Wilson, I think functionality is a portion of this. So whether that, I believe that would cover what you're referring to as traffic flow. So I believe it would be covered in that scope. That would be, again, this is a high level assessment, but certainly there could be some strategies associated with that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Padeco?
Quick question, how long of a timeline are you anticipating for the project to take?
I think what we would go through is an RFP process, and then this would be at minimum a few months to get these guidelines, but I think it's certainly a tool that administration and council could use moving forward to help define that public realm and our corridors, to not only ensure, as I indicated to Councillor Nagel, that there's functionality in our roadways, but they're also done in a manner that is an ad hoc development. You can see some of the development along Griffin, and it's just been done one development at a time. So I think it's certainly proactive planning. Oh, sorry. Maybe.
Timeline.
I think it'd be 3 or 4 months where we could get this complete, and of course it would be something that we'd bring forward to council for your endorsement.
Perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? No? All in favor of moving forward? Carried, thank you. Thank you, Drew. Ms. Lowe, welcome to tomorrow. I've lost half of mine up here.
Good evening, I'm here to present to council tonight consideration to appoint Mr. Ian, formerly known as Bob, who was my hope, as a development officer for the town of Cochrane. As council is aware, as part of the 2018 budget, council did approve the addition of a new position to the municipal enforcement section. Recently, administration did successfully fill the development compliance officer position with Mr. Bob Hope. He officially started with the town of Cochrane on August 14th and has definitely begun fulfilling that role already. However, part of the land use bylaw requires that council establishes and appoints development officers by resolution. It is important that the development compliance officer includes enforcement provisions of the Municipal Development Act and municipal bylaws. And in order to do so, he needs to pass that appointment to issue orders under Part 17 of the sections of the Municipal Development Act. So I'm here tonight requesting that council appoint Mr. Ian Hope as development officer for the Development Council.
Councillor Nagel?
I so move.
All right. All in favor? Carried, thank you. We should have our meetings at 11:30 more often. Said no one. Capital budget request. Mr. Murphy.
Good evening, Mayor Gannon and Council. This past spring, leaks were discovered at the Cochrane Public Library and road sign shed. It was determined that the leaks were from the flat roofs at those sites. Excuse me, inspections have been completed that suggest heavy ice conditions over the past winter accelerated the breakdown of the roof system at both sites. Minor repairs were completed as a temporary solution to stop the leaks. However, replacement is required to ensure a long-term solution as well to prevent any further damage to other areas on the sites. Roof replacement at both sites was not anticipated or included in the approved 2018 capital program, as the roofs were watertight and appeared to be in adequate condition when inspected prior to the development and adoption of the 2018 budget by council. The budget amount requested is based on pricing provided by proponents responding to the flat roof replacement RFP, which closed August 29th. The primary purpose of the flat roof replacement RFP was to obtain pricing to replace the flat roof at the operations shop. It was an approved 2018 capital project. However, the library and sign shed roofs were included in the RFP to encourage aggressive pricing based on the economies of scale. And so administration is proposing that $40,000 be drawn from the facility life cycling reserve to cover the cost of replacing the two roofs this fall. Should funding be approved, the facility reserve would have a remaining balance of $1.8 million. Administration is recommending option 1, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Flowers?
Move the recommended action that council approves a capital budget expense of $40,000 funded from the facility life cycling reserve to replace the flat roofs at the Cochrane Public Library and road signs storage shed. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. It's going to be a long time before there's a new library, if and when it ever happens, so it needs to be fixed.
Well, I wouldn't say that. The one question I would ask, it's just the flat roof portion of the library, not the entire roof, right?
To the chair, that is correct. The peak roofs were replaced 2 years ago.
Thank you. No other questions? All in favor of approving the capital expense? Carried, thank you. Motions on notice. Councillor Nagel, you have one.
I'll move the action. I move that council directs administration to bring back a proposed amendment to the town of Cochrane's park and open spaces maintenance standards to rezone the southeastern portion of the Bow Meadows Park as Class C maintenance standard area. It is also requested the town of Cochrane cuts the grass in this area at least once prior to the following winter months. Further, it is requested that administration provide estimates regarding the cost of such a policy change when they bring the report forward. This is about cutting the grass in Bow Meadows. The group that we've been engaging with agreed to compromise, and we've taken it down to like 2/3 of the grass of the pre-existing park. And yeah, does anybody have any questions for me on my motion?
I have one.
Yep.
It's about your 2/3. So you're asking, part of your motion is to not cut everything that was cut before, it's a portion of what was cut before?
Yes, and that's based on elevation, open to feedback from administration on that particular piece. I did include a map using Google Maps and Paint, the highly technical animating software. But it's a pretty detailed map.
Yeah, no, I saw that, I'm just
yeah.
clarifying that is what you're not trying to get back to what was there originally, you're trying to get a portion of it cut.
Yeah, being that we would allow the lower part lower in elevation that's closer to the river to go wild, and the part that's up, way away from the reach of the river, to be maintained as a regular park. And of course, open to flexibility and options when the report comes back.
And we're not directing anyone to do anything, we're asking, well, we are directing, but it's to come back with the costs and the report to do so. Okay, no more questions? All in favor? Carried, thank you. I'm going to skip my mayor's report, it's this long. Oh, I do have one item, sorry. It's, Councillor Wilson and I were at the CP emergency, where is it here? I'll let you speak to it, Councillor Wilson. But we were there together. You've got a little statement, right? Or something you'd like to share?
Not prepared, but it's
No.
exciting news,
Yeah.
at least. I don't know what it was called either, but it was a CP training event exercise.
CP emergency training exercise.
There we go. We got some, quite a lot of time in with Mike DeVecchio, is that the name right?
Lavecchio, yeah.
Lavecchio, sorry. And I think I'm excited to hear about some of the, a man with that amount of knowledge with helping communities to gain grade-separated crossings. He's been through this before, and I think he gave us some pretty good knowledge of exactly how we want to proceed with it, that I don't think we've done everything we can in the past, and I think there's some things we can be doing. The next step, I suppose, would be, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Mayor, but budget time, if we could allocate some funds to do some drawings for a couple of grade-separated crossings in this town, rather than the one we've talked about in the capital budget plan. We have reason to believe that CP would be willing to help us both with acquiring funding possibly, and also be able to make a business case to them for a reason to help us gain 2 separated crossings in the future. So very exciting, nothing given, but you know, some marching orders forward. I thought it was the biggest thing I've heard on council yet, so exciting news.
Thanks. Anyone else have anything to, Councillor Reid?
Yeah, just in the essence of time, I wanted to keep council informed about what's going on at Spray Lakes Sports Center. So you recall last meeting we approved $125,000 in hopes that that would secure a potential tenant. The tenant actually that they were working with has decided not to proceed. So the pool board will not do those renovations until such time as they actually have a tenant, but they are hoping to use those funds to leverage matching grant funds. In the meantime, the curling club has planned to host some private events for themselves. The second thing is a parking lot paving. The back parking lot, you may or may not know, has not been done. It's still gravel, and so estimated cost of paving that is between $240,000 and $275,000. With Totem, Spray Lakes, the county, and the town coming up with $50,000 each. But the board is going to come back through a capital request to the town and to the county and ask for an additional $75,000 as part of the 2019 budget. The boiler in Totem 2 burnt out, and so it's being replaced at $15,700, and that comes out of their reserve funds. The Generals hockey team, the Generals will be playing all of their games this year at the Cochrane Arena. And as such, they've asked for office or storage space, and the Generals are expected to cover the full costs of whatever those renovations might be. There are 3 business licenses that have been secured in terms of revenue. I don't know the totals, but it's good news. The operational audit, the board has decided to bring in a consultant to do an operational audit in terms of cost savings and a management audit. And just 2 other quick things. In terms of revenue, as a result of the new aquatic center opening last year and the sale of memberships, there was a huge increase in memberships purchased by users in 2017. Unfortunately, that did not reoccur this fall, and so they're projecting, they've adjusted their budget expectations. They've lowered it by $300,000 for the 2018-2019 year. Overall, the 3-year budget, the board approved a budget that shows a deficit of $1.2 million for this year, but they anticipate decreasing that over the next 3 years to an operating deficit of about $500,000. The interesting wrinkle is administration should note or has noted that in addition to that deficit, they're looking for a 5% contribution to their capital reserve. So I think there's still some room for discussion between administration and the board, as well as what development might come out of the ICF with the county. So that's my report on the pool.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Councillor Nagel?
Very quick, I apologize.
So I deferred mine and now everybody's got.
Well, I would be failing
Go
SDAB if I didn't comment. Our SDAB got together last week, and we were supposed to talk with land use bylaw, and they basically shared concerns about almost every topic in Cochrane. And first, I'd like to say Riley did a great job exercising patience, being the pin cushion, just taking it all. But with regards to the land use bylaw, my general takeaway is a lot of people, if not all, everybody on SDAB, very concerned about density and specifically its impacts on safety and parking. But there's about 3 hours of comments, so that's my takeaway. But we talked about parking a lot, so.
Thank you. Councillor Flowers.
Just a reminder about the Tri-Site Open House information gathering. We're calling it, excuse me, a roundup of information on Wednesday night at the Legion from 4 to 8. So it's a chance for people to come out and add ideas to the pile that we are gathering for the Tri-Sites.
All right. Okay, that's that, I guess. Motion to go in camera. I think we have one last item. No one? Councillor Reid, all in favor? Carried, thank you. We're going to move to the back room. Microphone.